as you know, to Aristotle, or in his analysis, there are three forms of friendship. There is what he calls the perfect or full or complete or first friendship. And then there's the friendship of pleasure and the friendship of use or usefulness. Of course, two of these are not as good as the first one. So the idea is that we could say that both friendships of pleasure and friendships of usefulness are very much secondary to what he calls the perfect friendship. Now, just to make a note of this straight away, as you're looking at the text, perfect friendship probably doesn't mean that it's only for perfect people. What it means is that it's the form of friendship that is perfect, and it's perfect in the sense that it reaches the goal of friendship, or the goal that is involved, whatever it is. Whereas the other two don't really. And that's the basic difference. So if we look at these two others first, just to start to hone in on what we're talking about here, then at least one thing we can say is that the friendship of pleasure and the friendship of usefulness, what is it that you love in the friend, if you love the friend or if you like the friend, in that kind of relation? Well, it's not the friend himself or herself in the full sense, because it will be something that's either pleasant about the friend's sort of ability to just please you, or something useful in the friend. So the idea might be, there are two ideas that you can keep in mind here, and it'll be a bit up to you which one you want to argue for if you're working on this. One is the idea that these things are wrong not because they aim at something that's true about the friend, but not the core of what the friend is. Because we know, according to Aristotle, what we are. We are our thinking part, most of all. We are ourselves as rational beings. And if the idea of pleasure or the idea of usefulness is not that, then it's not really the friend in himself or herself. But the other thing might be, the other way of looking at this might be even more problematic, and that's that both pleasure and usefulness, they don't refer to the friend at all, do they? They refer to you. It's back to the dear old self. The friend that you enjoy hanging out with because it's pleasant goes straight back to not really the friend, but it being pleasant for you. So it's just pure egotism, and you're not really getting the friend at all. And this is even more clear about friendships of usefulness. It's not useful for anyone or anything but you somehow. So that would also make these two friendships less real than the complete or perfect friendship, the friendship that has the end, whatever that end is, in self, included in itself. So these are main topics in trying to sort out both the analysis of the various kinds of friendship, but also to find out what is full friendship. Because one of the best means we have of doing that is finding out how it contrasts with these two other kinds. Because we know in Aristotle this all has to do, just as in Plato, it has to do with eudaimonia, one way or another. And to Aristotle, the full friendship is clearly a part of eudaimonia, of happiness, to the extent that he says that even if you could get all the other goods in life, if you had to say goodbye to all kinds of friendship, say goodbye to friendship for this, no one in their right mind would do that. I mean, that's not a choice that we would make. And the idea then is that, well, we would be right to be skeptical about that, making such a choice, because friendship is, to Aristotle, such a central and inherent part of what it means to live well, to have an actively good life, to be happy. So in fact, if you remember these notions, or the notion of belonging or something being one's own in Plato, you have a related thing in Aristotle as well. He too uses that term, a form of the word home or own. He says that the acts of the friend in the full sense are in a way your own. They are in a way, he says, like heion, which is sort of, they belong to you. So what does this mean? Because now we're talking primarily about the perfect friendship in order to flesh out what this is all about. I think on a minimal take, in order for your friend's actions to be somehow your own, you may have just sort of made them possible, minimally. Perhaps agreeing that, yeah, you'll do this and I'll do that, and we'll have separate lives. And so in a way, when your friend goes along and does his or her thing, you've got something to do with that. But that's probably very far from what Aristotle has in mind. Aristotle's image of this perfect and complete friendship is that it's nothing so much as living together. And that means that if you're talking about a particular action here, it's not off the table at all to think of the friend's action as typically, in this kind of close, perfect friendship, really being your own. It's not a metaphor. It's not a loose way of speaking. It really is your own, in such a radical way that we can here speak of collective agency. You and your friend really did this together. How does that happen? Well, you're living together. That is to say, not necessarily that you live in the same house, the same building, but that you share your days and you share activities. So whenever something is done behind that action, there is thinking about it, talking about it, planning for it, making decisions, asking and answering, going back and forth, looking into things, helping out. So when the action is performed, it really was your action in the full sense that it's the best and most truthful analysis makes it an action that you did together. And being friends means living one's life in such a way that it could be said then to share the same activities, which is pretty close in Aristotle to saying that you're in some way sharing eudaimonia. So if we thought counterfactually, if you took the friend out of someone's happy life, it would probably, if not collapse, then at least be seriously damaged, and it would take time to build it back up to anything like what it used to be with the friend. So relating now back this image of what it means to have a full, perfect friendship back into the question of how that relates to the other two kinds of friendship, the friendship of pleasure and the friendship of usefulness. The expression that you will find a lot in the literature is the idea of a focal analysis. So that there is one thing that is the main focus, and then the other things somehow belong to it. The way that Aristotle speaks about this is that saying that everything goes towards or in the direction of one thing. We've in the literature, this is often translated as a focal analysis, looking at the focus. Again, if we think of an analogy, we can use the same analogy that we did for the lysis, medical art. Then a focal analysis of the things and activities that make up this whole area would include such different things as a medical doctor standing over there, a scalpel lying on the table over there, perhaps the activity of cutting someone over there, and then what's it all relate to? Well, yeah, the end of it all, what gives meaning to it all, the sense of it all, the point of it all, the end, namely health, quite simply. So the focal analysis of medicine starts from realizing that bodily health is the focus, and only from that you will be able to understand all these other things, that this kind of knife that's used for opening up human beings, for instance, it makes sense in the light of the end, which is health. So that would be one form of focal analysis. So the question is, how does that fit onto friendship? Well, it doesn't seem to fit perfectly, because if the scalpel fits in the medical example, it's because the scalpel is an instrument used for surgery as a means to altering the condition of someone from relative sickness to relative health. But we can't say these things exactly, or should we? I mean, probably we can't say these things about the friendship of use or the friendship of pleasure. They don't seem to be means simply to the friendship of virtue, or the friendship of character, or this first or perfect friendship. So what is going on then? Well, perhaps what focal analysis means here is something like the end of the things that we call friendship, generally speaking, are they are all directed in towards, teleologically speaking, towards perfect friendship. So perhaps the idea could be that they would not naturally develop into it if nothing hinders, that kind of thing. We could, you can try to elaborate a response like that. Another alternative that doesn't really exclude this first option is to think from the other direction, namely that the perfect friendship, the friendship of character, where they actually enjoy each other's characters and shared activities, in other words, they enjoy a shared goodness. In this perfect friendship, you will find all the things that you find in the other kinds of friendship, because this perfect friendship also has pleasure, and it's also very useful, although that's not its main point and it's not its highest point. So that would mean that that friendship can be subjected to some kind of a focal analysis by thinking or by realizing that once you look at the paradigm of friendship, you get all the bits and pieces that you then can recognize in these other things that we happen to call friendship. And by that, you even started explaining why we call them friendship, because that wouldn't go for, it shouldn't be taken for granted that we should call them friendships if primary friendship is this thing of enjoying each other as the other is in him or herself, which is to say his or her character and its activation in a shared life. So these are just two directions, just to start sort of unwrapping what this might all mean that we find in Aristotle's basic analysis of friendship. One thing that we can also look at here is goodwill. Goodwill is very important to Aristotle's notion of friendship. And it's also one possible way, a possible third way then, of trying to think of the focal analysis. Maybe it's such that they all have goodwill in them, but only one of them does so to the full. Now, goodwill to Aristotle seems to be a very broad and crucial aspect of life. And we've already, in this week's lecture, looked back to Sophrosina quite a bit, a couple of times. And now we can also look forward to the question of the political community, because to Aristotle, he says that we can see a sort of friendliness among people everywhere we go, and nothing is as important to the good politician as trying to create something like friendship among the citizens. So there is this general goodwill that seems to be a basis for friendship. It's not the same, it's not enough for having full-blown friendship, but there's a basis for friendship in goodwill, a general goodwill that we have towards each other. Now, what is the relationship between goodwill and friendship? Well, if friendship requires in the full form shared activity, then friendship also requires that you not only have goodwill towards each other, but that your goodwill is recognized by the other in both directions, so that you have mutually acknowledged goodwill. You know about each other's goodwill. That would seem to be crucial. If you've got goodwill going only one way and the other direction, no goodwill and no, or perhaps not even that, but just no acknowledgement of it, then you have something more of like a fan, not a friend. But in this relationship of goodwill as a basic political thing, that leads us to think that if it's everywhere, how basic is it to friendship? If it's basic to human life as such? Well, perhaps we can make some kind of a distinction. You have a general, non-committal form of goodwill that is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And it's like almost like a social glue. It's a basis for our living together, for our liking to living together, even when we don't have to. For our getting along as much as we do, and for it being possible to live in cities instead of just exploding into the wilderness in different directions because we can't stand each other. So there's this basic goodwill that's important. But in a friendship, the goodwill isn't just a general, yeah, it's nice that you're here kind of thing. In friendship, it's a practical thing. So we can then distinguish general goodwill from a practical goodwill. A practical goodwill is one that is actually based on decisions. So that it's a goodwill that has translated itself into actually making choices for the other, for the sake of the other. Not just feeling that, yeah, it's nice that they're all here, but actually doing something for the other, making a choice, making a commitment. And we can see that this is beginning to look more like friendship. Then, of course, we still have the question, how about these other kinds? Do they live up to this? And that's again still the question. I think, and there's a lot of disagreement about this in the literature, but I think one reasonable and possible way to take it is that all the kinds of friendship, also the utility friendship and the pleasure friendship, they will basically be characterized by a general goodwill. And it'll probably be easily translated into practical means. If your business partner or your drinking buddy asks you for a small favor, you have the goodwill. You will probably provide, and it could be the beginning of something more, a fuller friendship. So there's no reason to think that only the perfect friendship has goodwill. That would be kind of a nasty thing, and I don't think that's true. But it hasn't been translated practically in the same way, perhaps, as in a full friendship. Also, I think if we distinguish between what you've got clearly ahead of you as the end and what is really the basis of the friendship, you will notice that if you have what is really a friendship based on usefulness, and that usefulness is taken away, say the other had money and now the money's gone, or the other party had contacts, useful contacts, and now the contacts are gone, then the friendship dies. Well, then that was based on utility then. It wasn't really based on this specific looking at the other in itself kind of attitude that has its origin in goodwill. So I think this kind of the proof of the pudding is in the eating could be an important element here. And I think it's also true, and Aristotle is realizing and is clear about the fact that most of the time we probably don't know. We're not always that good at knowing exactly what our motivations are. And in very many cases, they will be layered. So in many cases, you will have both the experience that there is a general goodwill, but you will also quite easily notice that you can take that goodwill away. So just imagine an example. You're just standing in line and someone just skips in ahead of you. They were standing over there and now they're just skipping in ahead of you and just taking your place, talking on their cell phone and just sort of moving you away because they think that they're in a hurry and they're more important than you. Now you're probably going to feel your goodwill, your general goodwill towards them, sort of, another person, nice enough, whittle away pretty quickly in that situation. You could imagine the other way around, someone else, that same person standing in the line, it's their turn, they're noticing that you are very stressed, you seem to be in a hurry, so they say, okay, go ahead, go in front of me, not a problem. Now you've got goodwill. Little episodes like that. But that's in this analysis, what happened is that it's really the other person making the decision, making their goodwill practical or not, by making a decision concerning you, either sort of just shuffling you aside or allowing you to go in ahead of them in the line. And then we can notice that the attitude that we have toward the other, parts of it can be moved or altered pretty quickly in those kinds of relationship, and in others not so much. Now I think these kinds of very simple examples can be instructive when it comes to the question of what do we mean by goodwill, and what must Aristotle mean by goodwill when he's talking about these broad political contexts, for instance. Part of it will be this kind of superficial idea of a basic friendliness. It's better to have these people here than not to have them here, something like that. But other things have to do with values, with actually sharing some basic values about how to live together, either as closely as in the perfect friendship, or as closely, which would be fairly closely, as in a city or in a society.